It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Well, here's the story, man. The NHS in the UK is looking at the option of regulating e-cigarettes to help those who want to quit smoking. Now, while regulators are still looking at licensing them for medical use, it is expected that they'll get the green light by the end of the year. So the big question is, could this be a breakthrough option for the many out there who want to stop smoking? Now, head of the Lung Clinical Research Unit at the University of Cape Town's Lung Institute is Dr Richard Val Zyl, Smit, and he's here to talk to us about this very, I think, a very interesting issue. Doctor, how are you this morning?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Lovely. So let's get straight off the bat and ask, what are your thoughts on e-cigarettes? Are they realistically a better option?
I think we would all love them to be a better option, given how bad cigarettes actually are and the fact that they kill half the people who use them. Then what we know about e-cigarettes, they are likely to be much safer. The big concern is how much safer, but certainly I would agree that they are likely to be a whole lot safer than smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's taken quite a long time to even find out about the real dangers of smoking cigarettes, about 50 years. And now, has there been enough work and enough research done into the after effects and the long-term effects of e-cigarettes to say that, well, they might actually be an option?
Well, in terms of the long term, no, and we just haven't had the time. We need another 10 or 15 years, and there's nothing we can do until we have those 10 or 15 years. In terms of short term, they contain far less of the cancer-causing drugs, far less of the tar that you'd find in a tobacco cigarette. So the small amount of research that has been done, they look safer, but they don't look absolutely without risk, which again is some of the concerns that are being voiced in the community in the respiratory world.
Yeah. And what are some of the after effects that one could expect from smoking e-cigarettes?
Well, if you're switching from tobacco, so a normal tobacco cigarette, to an e-cigarette, you will feel a whole lot better because you don't have the carbon monoxide, you don't have all those burnt products. If you're switching from fresh air, as it were, to using an e-cigarette, well, then you're going to be exposed to different things like propylene glycol, which is a chemical in the e-cigarettes, and nicotine. So they do contain nicotine, which again is a little bit of a concern in terms of the addiction. So you aren't dealing with the addiction, but you're making it safer, effectively, to continue with your smoking.
Yeah. So with the data that we have right now concerning smoking vapor versus smoking cigarettes, do you actually think it's an option that we could look at in South Africa?
So I think there are two concerns. One is the price, so it's not necessarily cheaper.
Okay.
So if you're telling people to switch from one to the other, those that can afford will be able to do so. And switching from tobacco to an e-cigarette as part of a process of getting off smoking completely is a very enticing and I think exciting option, but there just isn't enough data at this point to say it's going to work for everyone. And we know for those that smoke, not everything works. Some require medication, some don't. So it's not going to be the silver bullet that solves our smoking problems.
Yeah. And for those who might say, well, these e-cigarette companies are owned by tobacco companies anyway, so maybe are they just trying to up the market value of their businesses? What would you have to say to that? Some kind of conspiracy that people might come up with?
It certainly makes it a whole lot more tricky as to what you can believe in terms of the marketing. And even some of the research is funded by e-cigarette companies. And so there is some concern about the validity of the data. But generally speaking, it looks like they're safer. But time, unfortunately, is required for us to know for certainty.
Indeed, time is required. And now, 5FM DJ Nick Hammon has been rather public about his journey to being smoke-free, and he's joining us on Skype right now. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us about your journey. How long has it been since you've been smoking?
Hey, good morning, Espresso. I've been smoking. It's difficult. I started smoking in like grade 9, probably 2006, but I became a full-time smoker in like 2011 from second year varsity.
Yeah. So when you first decided to stop smoking, did you have any fears related to the process of actually quitting?
Yeah, many. There's a difference, I think, between getting this idea in your head that you want to quit and then deciding for real. So I only really decided for real to stop smoking earlier this year, but I've probably tried to quit about 50 times.
Wow. And so what was your method that helped you to cut down on your need for cigarettes?
I've tried everything that there is to stop smoking. On my radio show, we actually asked listeners for advice and things that worked for them. A lot of people don't know this, but my mother's actually a hypnotherapist, and she's tried it on me a couple of times, and some of her friends have as well, and it's never really worked. I know that hypnotherapy has worked for a lot of people, patients that my mother's had, for example, but it was actually a conversation with a friend that sort of flipped something in my mind, and it was from there that I actually almost overnight went from smoking like a box a day to not being enslaved by the cigarette anymore, and now being able to decide if I want to have one in the afternoons, that it's okay and I can do that, and then not have to from there, you know, smoke an entire box.
Yeah. So in your opinion, do you think that this, you know, story of e-cigarettes being used as an effective tool to help people quit smoking, do you think it could work?
You know what? From the information that I've been presented with, it's evident that there's nothing conclusive here. And often with something like cigarettes, there is going to be conflicting medical research from both sides of the argument. There are commercial interests too with things like this. There's obviously also the complications of a government-funded project. So they're saying basically that e-cigarettes are supposedly 95% safer, but they're also saying we don't know that for sure. I think that it misunderstands the problem in my mind. And, you know, for me, finding a substitute for cigarettes, whether it was a lollipop or an e-cigarette, never worked for me, because I think people smoke because of cognitive dissonance. You know, we know it's wrong, we know it's unhealthy, but psychologically we continue to form habits and we continue to do it. And I don't actually buy the idea of physical addiction. I think that it's more in the mind, and that your brain needs to shift in terms of how you think about the cigarettes. And so I wouldn't encourage the idea of pursuing e-cigarettes as an alternative. But if it works for you, we're all different.
Yeah. Well, clearly you've come a very long way in your journey, so I'd like you to share some words of wisdom to those that are trying to quit smoking out there.
Yes. You have to ask yourself the question, how badly do you want to stop smoking? If you don't want it with all that you have, you're never going to be able to quit. Friends of mine, the conversation that I had with a mate that pushed me to the point where I was like, no, this is enough now, is he said, you know what, I hated myself when I was a cigarette smoker. And it sat with me because I'd never really thought of it in those terms. You know, I never really genuinely considered the act of smoking and truly acknowledged, like, you know, the negative health implications, which we all know about. But through that conversation, I started to, and then something just awoke in me. And I decided, you know, this is not for me anymore. It was the same kind of rhetoric that I used last year. I lost 25 kilograms in a period of 3 months. And it wasn't to do with, you know, trying to suppress cravings or trying to take diet pills or anything. Like, it was a mental shift. It was getting to that space of really just wanting to do it. And the words of wisdom that I have for anybody who wants to quit smoking, or at least cut it down to a much lesser extent like I have, is that everything just gets better. You have more energy. You're less lethargic, less tired. You look better, my skin is cleared up, like my nails aren't all yellow and funny anymore, and you just feel like you're in control again, which is good.
Well, mate, thank you so much for that. 5FM DJ Nick Hammon sharing with us his story and his journey for stopping smoking. And thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us as well and sharing your words of wisdom. Well, stay tuned to your Feel Good Breakfast show that continues after this break.